really through with Thoreau and we haven't done a thorough job, so I'm going to continue. By then, page 413. By then the clouds had rolled in again. For the rest of the day they hurried between thunderstorms. They are near the summit of Mount Cotterton in Maine. Relieved to reach Chamberlain Farm by nightfall. This is a continuation of the canoe trip. Thoreau ran up to the main house to buy supplies. Then Polis, who's the Indian guide, ran up for a visit. It was bad form, he explained, to pass a house without stopping to exchange the news. See, like when you're in this isolated area, these people don't see anybody. You're like the news channel. So back then, the news is a passerby. Thoreau and Hoar waved him off with a laugh. They wanted wilderness. They didn't want to stop at the house. They wanted wilderness, not gossip at every cabin along the way. While Polis sat visiting, the weary Concord adventurers snugged into their tent, lulled by the rain into deep sleep. Oh, the resting. Thoreau would need it, for the next day brought his severest test. He skipped breakfast to cross Chamberlain Lake in the early morning, coasting along while Polis scooped out the hillsides with an eye to purchasing a few hundred acres. Commercial success meant that the dispossessed Polis could buy back some of the Penobscot's former lands. Now he's like sort of an Indian chief, and he's trying to get buy their land back. Their route led them through Talos Lake, the original head of the Allagash St. John watershed, down the artificial canal to Webster Lake, the head of the Penobscot watershed. When the northbound drainage had been reversed, it released rushing waters that carved this connecting canal into a vast, rocky waterway, quote, something like navigating a thunder spout. Far too dangerous, Judge Polis, for his inexperienced clients. They could have taken the other route up by Canada, and here they're taking the rapids. So while Polis ran the birch bark canoe down the rapids, his clients portaged the baggage and joined Polis at Webster Lake. During an exhilarating coast down the lake's smooth, slanting water, Polis reminisced about stopping by Daniel Webster's home in Boston to pay his respects. Remember my relative Daniel Webster? There's actually a Webster in the Smith line, and it passes by. It passes into the Websters. And who is that Thankful Smith? Is a cousin to Emily Dickinson? So there's some remote relatives related in the line, that is. Dancer's home in Boston to pay his respects. The great lawyer kept Polis waiting so long that he gave up and left. Before being patient, Polis returned the next day and was again ignored. Seeing Webster walking back and forth past the open door, still ignoring him, Polis approached. Quote, "What do you want?" challenged Webster, raising a hand as if to strike. The architecture of manifest destiny was not open to diplomacy, let alone common courtesy. Polis left disgusted. Oh my God. No Indian would have been so rude. Why is he so rude? Is that the Daniel Webster of the dictionary? I don't know. The trouble started at the next rapids. The water was high and violent. And again Polis asked the white man to lighten the canoe and walk alongside, keeping him in sight to make sure he was all right. Some ways down, as Thoreau paused to help Polis lift the canoe over a rock, Ed Hoar quite unaccountably disappeared. The last Thoreau had seen him, he was rounding a precipice, picking his way down toward shore. Thoreau knew his friend was very nearsighted and that his mangled feet disabled him from walking far. That Hoar was in fact struggling badly.
Why did they pay to your family?
Well, like, how you gotta go back home. He's no, dear. His feet became mangled from walking so much with bad shoes, and they became rubbing and from the trip, not the fire. One more. What?
Why the rest of them alone then?
It didn't. It got lost. One more carry, he had confessed to Thoreau, and we should see a dead man. Talking about himself. It was as if he had sunk into the earth, wrote Thoreau, who bolted along the precipice looking for him. Then in mounting panic coursed back and forth at the base, fearing to find Ed's broken body in the rocks.
They found him?
No, he was afraid of finding him. Polis, meanwhile, was searching down the river. By the time he returned to tell Thoreau he found Hoar's tracks, Thoreau was in a full-blown anxiety attack. This is worse than the movie Deliverance. What if Hoar were not found? Question mark. How could he face Ed's family if he returned without him? The same family that had smoothed over the damage when Henry and Ed set fire to the woods. He gets in trouble in the woods. Polis struggled to calm the hyperventilating Thoreau, who tried to listen. The sun was setting. They could not possibly continue down the rapids in the dark, or had surely found his way downriver. Nothing in these woods offered him the slightest danger. A night alone would hardly kill him. But all night Henry tossed and turned, hearing Ed's voice calling him, and he darkly distrusted Polis. Perhaps the Indian had deceived him. Perhaps he'd only pretended to find Ed's tracks in order to placate Thoreau and excuse his own Indian laziness. In short, Thoreau was a wreck, and he knew it, but he couldn't control his emotions. This is trouble on the canoe trip. The awful night was barely over when Thoreau shook Polis awake, insisting they leave before breakfast. Polis obliged, and they managed the rest of the difficult carry together. Thoreau constantly howling Ed's name until, joy of joys, Ed answered, just after Polis and Thoreau reached calmer waters and launched the canoe. Again and again Thoreau shouted back until Polis, exasperated, snapped, "He hears you, as if once was enough," he called Thoreau dryly, and there, just below the mouth of Webster Stream, was Ed Hoar. So they found him. Sitting by his campfire, smoking his pipe. See, Thoreau thought he was dead. Instead on the rocks. So it's not as tragic, as Deliverance, and they didn't have a cell phone. They wouldn't have coverage anyways. They didn't have satellite phones. Now it's easier to hike with your satellite phone. And you could have your GPS tracking device.
Nothing to read at this stuff.
Do you have a GPS tracking device? He had done exactly as Polis said. Polis was right. He did find his tracks. The reunited three cooked a breakfast over Orr's campfire and ate it. Thoreau remarked with good appetites. We're continuing this canoe trip. This is like Thoreau's movie Deliverance. Thoreau's Deliverance. Their intense relief carried them down the beautiful Grand Lake Matagaman, calm, serene, and smooth as glass, a halcyon moment. Do you know what a halcyon moment is? Halcyon. Suddenly Polis exclaimed, "Moose, moose!" I remember seeing mooses swimming across the lake in Maine. I saw these things like antlers. I initially saw it and it looked like kayakers. I thought I saw paddles and I thought the antlers were paddles. And I said, "Look at the kayakers." And the joke was it turned out to be moose. And his own goal for the trip had been to shoot a moose. Remember, Polis's goal was to shoot moose, and here she was, watching unafraid from the shallows as they approached, then stepping warily to higher ground. Polis fired and missed. She moved off without haste until he reloaded and fired 2 more shots. Polis was as excited as a 15-year-old boy, said Orr, who saw his hand trembling. But his shots were true. The moose dropped where she stood. Perfectly dead. So Thoreau is out with these killers without killing animals. Despite all his objections at Kasunkuka, Thoreau had just witnessed his second moose kill. Polis skinned and butchered the moose with swift and practiced efficiency while Thoreau noodled about looking for fish in the muddy shallows. Polis wrapped a large sirloin neatly in the folded skin, which he packed in the bottom of the canoe, 100 pounds, or as he said, 1 man more. That's like 1 more man in the canoe. In a canoe already heavily loaded with 2 clients and their massive gear. If they waited, Polis offered her calf would come by and he would get it for them. Thoreau revolted, picked an argument with him. It was a sore subject. Killing moose for the market had allowed Polis to maintain his traditional culture and buy back his land. But when he insisted that he had to kill to support his family, Thoreau charged this was the, quote, the common white man's argument. Because the Indian says he has to kill. That's the white man's argument.
Right, means the Indian.
The common white man's argument that he had to kill to support his family. Do you think we should kill to support our family?
Who's our family?
Well, we could kill just for us to eat. You want to kill to eat? You want to kill chickens? You want to kill cows? Polis raising questions. The unquestioned life is not worth living. While Thoreau had protested that economy in Walden and Maine, neither Thoreau's philosophy nor his example could help Polis and his people survive. But finally there, by the river, the whole argument was academic. They were all sick of cured pork, and Thoreau admitted that the moose meat, fried up over the campfire, was very sweet and tender. The rest of the journey was far easier as they coursed down the Penobscot in their overloaded canoe. Polis lightened the load a bit at every stop by cutting away more fur from the moose skin, which he stretched one night in camp. The teaching continued. Polis showed them how to write on birch bark with a black spruce twig. Do you know how to do that? You can write on birch bark with a black spruce twig, a form of literacy long known to his people. Seems they're illiterate. And then when he noticed Thoreau had trouble reading in the firelight, he showed him how to make a birch bark candle. They're learning Indian tricks. When Orr lost his pipe, Polis made him another from birch bark. By August 1st, 2 days after killing the moose, they had nearly reached the Hunt's house, the last on the journey upstream before the road turned to Catadin's the mountain. Thoreau hoped to complete the ascent he had attempted in 1846, a chance to reckon again with the mountain that still troubled his dreams. But it was not to be. Ed Hoar could barely walk. His feet were still raw from sloshing for miles in the swamps around Chamberlain Lake. You see, like, one of the most important things to a hiker is his boots. Do you think a set of proper boots, or more than one even, is the solution? Polis offered to run up to Hunt's for a pair of soft moccasins, swearing that with a few pairs of socks they would allow Orr to walk, and that being porous they would keep his feet dry. But the men went down the river nevertheless. Getting seriously lost was deeply instructive for Thoreau, but it cost him his longed-for rematch with the primal mountain of his imagination. Maybe I should climb that mountain on his behalf. Should I go up and climb it? Do I need an Indian or a hiking guide? Do I need a canoe? How do I get a birch bark canoe? I'm going to look up birch bark canoe. And I need a birch bark pipe and a birch bark candle. And I could write on birch bark with a birch black sprig twig. So I could use that as my pencil. Polis offered to run up to Hunt's for a pair of soft moccasins. We read that. But the men went down the river nevertheless. And Polis had his own cause for sorrow. Had he known they were heading straight home, he would have taken all the moose meat to his family, not just one sirloin, a waste he regretted deeply. As they approached the settlements, Polis took care to lighten the mood. At the carry around Whetstone Falls, he challenged Thoreau to a race. Quote, "I'll take Canoe, and you take the rest. Suppose you can keep along with me." Thoreau took the bet and started packing up. Gun, axe, paddle, kettle, frying pan, plates, tippers, and carpets. Whereupon Polis tossed him his cowhide boots. And these too, grasped Thoreau. Oh yeah, called Polis as he disappeared in bare feet over the mountain hill with the kayak on his head. He's a fool to challenge an Indian. Thoreau scraped his load together and pounded off, soon passing him. But suddenly the plates and dippers took to themselves wings, and while Thoreau grabbed them up, things were falling down. Polis passed him again. So Thoreau hugged the sooty kettle and rattled off again, passing Polis for good this time. Where have you been? Thoreau teased him after finish. Quote, rocks cut my feet, laughed Polis. Quote, oh me, love to play sometimes. Often race at carries, see who get over first. I carried the sign of the kettle the rest of the voyage, added Thoreau. On down the river, wild villages appeared where in 1846 Thoreau had seen only a house or two. Once a mother held her child up to the window to see the motley voyagers pass by. On their second to last day, Thoreau woke up sick, forcing them to lay over just about above Lincoln. I think Lincoln is a town in Maine. An annoyed Thoreau thought Polis was moaning for show and considered leaving him to take the stage to Bangor. But when Polis objected, Thoreau stayed with him. The next morning Polis was well again, having cured himself with a concoction of gunpowder. So he cured himself with gunpowder. He knew, he told Thoreau, the medicinal uses of all the plants in the woods. And as they approached their last rapids, Polis finally taught Thoreau how to paddle a canoe properly. You know how to paddle a canoe properly? Would you like to go canoeing? Puzzled, Thoreau went along, recalling that Polis had earlier praised him, even giving him a name that meant, he said, great paddler. He was called the Great Paddler. But that was then, and this was serious. Polis genuinely needed Thoreau's help. He showed Thoreau where to place his hands and how to use the side of the canoe as a fulcrum. Thoreau was astonished at the improvement and proud to pass his first test. As they reached the rapids, Polis shouted, paddle! And paddle he did, getting them through without splashing a single drop into the boat. I guess you have to paddle hard in rapids, he said, because you have to blast your way through them, I guess. In the 325 miles in nearly 2 weeks they traveled together. Polis shared with Thoreau many stories of his own life, each one revealing something of the Penobscot world. Now on their last day, he shared some of his tribe's history. Including the ruse Polis used to prevent a Catholic priest from cutting down their liberty pole, which for Polis and his followers signified their belief in modern schools. Polis believed education was essential as a way to protect Penobscot sovereignty. As he told Thoreau, if you had been to college and learned to calculate, you could keep 'em property, no other way. He was proud of his son, the scholar at the white school at Old Town. As for himself, when Thoreau asked if he wasn't glad to get home, Polis answered, quote, it makes no difference to me where I am. These Indians are like Zen masters or something. Thoreau was impressed. Quote, there was no relenting to his wildness. They lingered for an hour at Polis's, quote, roomy and neat house. and Thoreau saw Mrs. Polis, though without being introduced. When he and Orr inquired about the next train to Bangor, Polis's son brought in the Bangor newspaper, which Thoreau noticed was addressed to Joseph Polis. They took the last train, reaching Bangor that night, and lingered for 3 more days, resting, hearing, and regaling Thoreau's cousins with stories as they hunted ducks or poked around the sites of old Indian villages. On Friday, August 7th, they headed home. Thoreau was back the next day in time for breakfast. Seems he got a lot of stuff about Indians, you know. Could be interesting. Through the fall, Thoreau worked on the Allagash and the East Branch, who wrestled with the meaning of his encounter with the Penobscot world. Once upon a time, he and John had played the Indian. Thoreau, that's his brother. Thoreau pretending to be the long-vanished Tahatawan, mocking the council chambers of white America. But Polis had been inside those very chambers, playing for real and for keeps for the future of his people as a living and vital nation. Polis confounded everything Thoreau knew. He lived in a neat and roomy frame house and took the daily newspaper, even while stretching animal hides in his front yard. He was at home on the streets of Philadelphia, calling on Senator Daniel Webster, purchasing a few hundred acres of real estate or managing his 50-acre hay and potato farm. He was also at home, Neosaucet, he alone, Joseph, from the high Allagash to the slopes of Katahdin to the inland seas of Millinocket, places where he might live and die and never hear of the United States, never hear of America, so called from the name of a European gentleman. See, America's named after a European, Amerigo Vespucci or somebody. From then on, Thoreau never missed a chance to praise Indians. He's quite an impressive Indian, this guy. And defend them against the prejudices of his friends. In a sentence he wrote for The Maine Woods. See, that's a book, I think, The Maine Woods, which somebody eventually deleted. He asserted that his Indian guides were as reliable as white men. Quote, far more instructive companions, unquote, and, quote, first-rate fellows, unquote, to boot. Quote, he begins where we leave off, unquote, he gushed to Blake a few days after his return, quote, the Indian who can find his way so wonderfully in the woods possesses so much intelligence which the white man does not, and it increases my capacity as well as faith to observe it. I rejoice to find that intelligence flows in other channels than I know. At Harvard, he startled the new librarian John Langdon Sibley by insisting on the mistake of science, quote, in not giving more attention to the Indians and their languages and habits, unquote. They have much to teach, for instance, what must they know of the cedar? They who have, quote, more than 50 names for it. His guide had located a snake by its call. What naturalist knew that fact? Polis could call animals to him and knew more of the habits of fish than Agassiz had even dreamed. No, this is almost about Indians. George Curtis was astonished at such talk, so entirely unlike that in novels of the theater, quote, untouched by romance or sentimentality. Thoreau told Curtis the Indian was not doomed, but, quote, damned because his enemies were his historians. He could only say, if the Lions had painted the picture. He startled Alcott and Emerson too by defending, quote, the Indian from the doctrine of being lost or exterminated, and asserting, quote, he holds a place between civilized man and nature and must hold it. Alcott dismissed the notion, like the woods and the beast, that the savages succumbs to the superiority of the white man, quote, the savages, quote, all are brutes, larger still. As Emerson said with a fond smile, quote, Henry avoids commonplace and talks birch bark to all comers. So he speaks about birch bark with his birch bark canoe throughout 1857. Thoreau added to his Indian books, finishing Volume 10 early in 1858. Only in April 1861 did he set aside the 12th and final volume. 12 volumes. His thousands of pages of notes documented the damnation he saw visited upon Indians by their so-called historians and recorded all he could glean of their lives and customs. Most of his sources were by white authors, since few Native Americans had yet broken into print. But when Thoreau could find books by Native authors, he read them avidly, such as The History of the Ojibwe of Western Lake Superior by George Compway, or Ga 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 Ba, the first book by a Canadian First Nations author. Thoreau, who could rarely afford books, purchased a copy for his personal library and annotated it heavily. It's a long reading here. What were his intentions for this tremendous project? He may have planned to write a book on the Indian, but if so, this plan ended with Joe Polis. Even so, his interest in Indians continued. He worked the Maine woods into a counter-ethnography of living Indians, as well as revealing account of his own evolution from prejudice and disgust in Cottigan to his awed recognition of their humanity in Cook, who are flawed and challenging exploration of cultural boundaries in the Allagash and East Branch. After this journey, Thoreau's goal shifted. His next book would weave Indian names and practices together with the seasonal ripening and communal enjoyments of wild fruits, imagining a turn to nature not as a return to primitivism, but as a contemporary renewal of the deep communal intertwining of nature and culture. The idea had been percolating for years. Now, having been tutored by Polis, he could see how it might be focused and organized. From the fall of 1857, Thoreau's journal explored some of his most luminous insights before honing them into his next book, Wild Fruits. We're stopping on page 421. We read about his Indian friend Polis and about his trip to Maine and the end of his canoe trip. His deliverance. Thoreau's deliverance. Reading from Henry David Thoreau, Life.